Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Film School podcast. On today's very special episode, I'm sitting down to interview Bruce Wemple. He is the director of the brand new movie Island Escape, which is out now on VOD. You can check out the trailer right now, and then we'll get into our full interview. Beware, there are a couple spoilers near the end of the conversation, but we keep it fairly spoiler-free for the beginning so you can get some background on Bruce and some of the inspirations throughout his early career. So stay tuned. I'll drop a spoiler warning in the middle before we dive into the movie and let you know what's coming. But for now, go ahead and enjoy today's episode.
2 days ago, there was an accident at a research center off the coast of northern Canada involving a certain CEO's daughter. We need a team to go in and extract her within the next 24 hours.
What do you know about me?
I know you were recruited to the Ghost Project when you were 18. They stripped you of any legal identity, so if you died, no one would know. Discretion is their top priority.
There are two possible research camps where the target could be located, north and south.
Any idea what we're dealing with?
Just that it's dangerous.
What the hell could have done that?
Y'all see anything?
My guess is that surviving on the island for longer than 3 days has proven to be difficult.
Man, what the hell is that?
It's us. That's us. But if it's killing everyone on the island, it's some version of us. How do you survive against an island full of stronger, faster, deadlier versions of your previous selves? Look, this is going to sound crazy. The whole island seems to be surrounded by some sort of wormhole.
Bruce, thank you so much for joining me on today's show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, excited to have you on. Excited to talk all about your new movie. But before we do that, I want to build some context around you. So take me back to the very beginning. Talk about childhood Bruce. Like, what were you into? Were you always interested in time loops and science fiction and all of that good stuff?
That's funny. It's a funny question. I will say I was always, as soon as I had a camera, I was making movies. You know, my buddies and I. It was actually, there was a funny thing in in middle school, let's say into high school. You know, I definitely was not paying as much attention to my actual classes as I should have been.
Right.
But I always had kind of this scheme where near like the end of whatever it was, a quarter or semester, I would ask the teacher, be like, because I was doing really bad in the class, can I get some extra credit if I make a movie about whatever that is doing? And usually I was able to persuade them to do it, and it would kind of get me out of jail near the end.
Right.
And my parents found out I was doing this, and actually had to have a conference with the teachers and told them, you got to stop letting him do movies for, he's not learning anything and everything like that. And so, but besides that, I mean, I'm not sure if it was always sci-fi and horror, but definitely genre stuff. I think we always growing up, we were just, a lot of it was just recreating scenes we loved from our favorite movies, and we loved tropes. I mean, I think that's something that kind of carried on through, my career. Is just like, I love tropes. I love that feeling of like seeing a hero that feels familiar from something else, or maybe a little bit changed, or that plot device that feels familiar, and then. So yeah, that's kind of, and then went to like a film school-ish sort of thing and came out of that, and started directing training videos and stuff like that before got my hands dirty doing a couple features, some horror stuff for literally no money. It was one of those things where like this movie Monstrous is a Bigfoot movie, and I was really making the costume on my roof in Brooklyn, like painting the fur and but doing whatever to put it together. And then we made it, for like a couple grand, whatever we had saved up.
Sure.
And that was the first movie that like we got connected with a distributor who actually was like, oh, this is worth money.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to do more of this? Do you
Right.
want to make another one? And to us, like, and they get, they were giving us next to no money to make these things, but to us, like, anything was something. And we were like, we're actually making movies, not with just like whatever we can scrounge up around, our apartment or at the house. That was the first time it was like, we have, and again, this budget was nothing, but it was for us, it was just like, we can feed ourselves on set. This is great,
right.
that kind of feeling. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, going back, because I'm always interested in, obviously, like, the origin story a little bit. And it's one of the things that kind of frustrates me about the education system, is that if you've got a propensity toward what you want to do. And I was a similar way. Like when I was in like first, second grade, like we were running around with cameras and like shooting stuff. And in high school, I wish I would have thought to like barter with my video skills. I just was like, here, I'll do these things for you. But it is frustrating where, you're sitting there, you're showing skill in this area, what you want to do, as a 15, 16-year-old, like, this is all I want to do. And then it's like, well, focus on geometry right now, and it's like, there could be some push to help you develop those skills, push toward mentorships and, trying to do these sorts of things. If you could go back to that age, knowing what you know now, what are some things that would have helped you kind of along your journey, or things that you wish you would have done a little bit differently at the beginning to kind of jumpstart your career?
I think that's a good question. Because I was kind of an annoying kid with my friends. Of like every weekend, I was like, guys, we think we should make a movie.
Yeah, right.
And half the time they were down and super excited, and then the other half they're like, we just did that. Let's do something else this weekend.
Yeah.
But for the most part, yeah, and I think for me it was I didn't realize, I don't think, how much you learn by making just bad things, and like until later. And so I did it a lot, but I'm like, if I could have done it even more, that would have been fantastic. It's hard to say, because knowing now, like, I'm actually doing it all the time, and it's it's supporting. It's tough to in hindsight be like, oh, I should have just quit everything else and focused on film.
Right.
But that maybe would have been crazy. But no, I think what I always say is, like, it's so much fun, especially in college. But before then, when you have the freedom to just like make something really, really, really bad, but learn about 1,000 things in the process of making it, edit it together, look at it and be like, this doesn't work. Or maybe there's something in there that works or something like that. And then just immediately dive into whatever the next project is, and just keep doing that. Because I don't know. I had always had the feeling, like, when even in high school, there was some kind of film classes. I wouldn't say they were like, it was whatever you put into them. It was kind of like they gave you a camera and they said, this is a movie. This is, how to edit. This is how to white balance, that kind of stuff. But I think if you have access to that equipment, and I guess if I had access to more equipment, maybe, but I don't know, it just, you use that because I also felt the classes can only go so far. I mean, unless you're really into like film theory and that's what you want to study,
right? But
just and I'm not talking about making stuff that you're actually spending money on or doing anything. I'm just making stuff that's just for you and your friends.
Right,
goes a long way in developing those skills. I think more than I think you might realize at the time.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned making stuff that's bad and learning from those mistakes, but I think one of the other things that comes up is, like, it's hard to identify what is bad, like, especially when you're starting, like, I mean, I remember like doing a lot of early stuff, and it's like, man, there's this really cool close up of this thing that makes no sense when dropped in the middle of everything else that I'm working on. Who are kind of your North Star, guides, who are saying like, hey, double down on this, or hey, don't do that again? Like, did you have some mentors or people that were speaking into you? I mean, outside of, obviously, like, in film school, you've got, people that are doing that, but did you have any other creators or influencers that kind of took you under their wing in the beginning?
I mean, yeah, going back, I mean, like, my parents did put the kibosh on the extra credit thing, but they were always super supportive of, just me doing it and spending every ounce of free time I had doing that. And they were always encouraging that. They just were like, he still needs to go to college and get an education, or else he's gonna be screwed. But yeah, then in high school, like, there was a couple teachers. There's one specifically, creative writing teacher, that he did one assignment in the creative writing class that was a kind of a screenwriting assignment. It was like write like a short screenplay, and that was the first time that like any of the technical side of screenwriting, before it's like we're in like Word, just like name colon writing it, that kind of thing, and just doing whatever. And that was the first time, like, and then he read it and he could tell like I wanted to keep doing this more and more and more. So he started being very encouraging. And as I was making stuff, I'd show him things, terrible things, like not terrible, but like, we'd make some stupid like Batman ripoff fight scene in a parking lot at the time. And we'd show him and he'd be like, oh yeah, and he'd give his thoughts and notes and stuff. And that was really encouraging. Yeah. And then I think that went a long way, just like being like, oh, if we make something, and then we put a good amount of effort into it, make it kind of like there's someone, an older person that we show it to, and they'll get a little bit of feedback, and that's nice. So
sure, yeah. Well, talk to me a little bit. I mean, obviously you mentioned starting super low budget, and working your way into actually making this a career. Was the vision always directing, or did you have any notion of like, I want to get in front of the camera, or I want to be just writing, or I want to be a cinematographer, like, or was it always like, I just want to make my own thing and have kind of control over it from start to finish?
It's weird. Like, I think there was this period where I was like, I would DP stuff for friends and stuff. And I still like doing that here and there, but that, I think you're right. It goes back to that feeling like in either whether it's high school or college of just like getting on the phone, calling up your friends and putting a project together. That kind of like carries on now where, it's you have an idea for something and it doesn't, I guess there's like that difference between directing and like filmmaking, where like filmmaking, I feel like I'm putting this project all together and it feels very homemade a little bit. And I like that. And versus just directing something and having a bigger team that's more supporting you. No, I think I've done other projects that had bigger sets and stuff, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not the same vibe, and I also noticed on those projects, I'm like, a lot of this budget's just like really getting lost somewhere. Like I know the numbers, and like it just none of this is making sense, and like all that matters is what's on that screen, what's on the your monitor. And so there was like a period of time. This is like we made a movie called Lake Artifact. And this is 2016, 2017, but we had just made a different movie and I'm very happy with the movie, but the experience was, like I said, it was, there was maybe more people, more involved, more cooks in the kitchen than necessarily needed to be. And then, so this next movie, I got my composer buddy he just decided he'll do the sound. I shot it and directed it. We had a couple other friends helping out. I called some actor friends and I was like, hey, I want to make this movie. It all takes place at a cabin. The movie takes place over 3 days. I rented the cabin. You want to come? I'll give you beer for the weekend. And and be like, I'm like, I don't know if it's going to work because we have no crew and anything, but if it does, awesome. And if it doesn't, it's a fun weekend of just like making stuff and partying and everything. And so we did that. And again, it was fun. But the movie was like, again, there's technical issues within it. And I'm like, it's not like, shouldn't be shown as an example, but that process kind of sparked something in me where I was like, okay, I think there's somewhere between the big indulgent sort of whatever you want to call it, crew or spending a ton on certain gear and then what we just did. What we just did is like the bare minimum of what you could possibly make something with.
Right.
And I think I'm still trying to find like, where's that sweet spot of it feels like everyone's collaborating. There's no passengers there. Everyone feels like they're just all making something together. But you don't get too big or too, so
Sure.
I think that's something I'm still trying to find, but I think that's kind of like going from one end to another, like figuring out, like I said, how to make something that just I enjoy that feeling when everyone on set feels like they have ownership of the project and everyone's participating in it.
Right. So now approaching Island Escape, you've got a lot of people that you worked with before that have come back and are working with you on this project. Like, going into it, did you know, hey, I want to use these actors again? Do I want to use the same community of people around me? Or was it something where that just kind of happened, like, as you went through the project? Or were you writing it in mind of like, I want these people as these characters?
I think we wrote it because, like, honestly, like I said, when we were working with Next to No Money back then, the budgets haven't gotten that much bigger. It's not like we're,
right.
It's still kind of in the same, similar place. But and what I love a little bit about that is we do these movies, and everyone has a little bit of ownership in the project, and then the next movie, regardless if the budget's the same, maybe it's a little more, everyone's just trying to outdo whatever we just did. And so there's that is super fun. So there's that side of it, of bringing people back. The other thing is, I knew this was going to be a really hard shoot. I knew it was very ambitious for the project, for the budget. And I needed people who had been in the foxhole with me before, and I could trust that, like, when the going got a little tough, when we're hiking up a mountain to do a mountaintop fight scene that has a lot of complicated moving pieces around it, and probably going to have to hike back in the dark because we're shooting, at that golden hour. I just needed people that, like, I knew were down to do that, and everything was safe, but I couldn't have anyone that just, like, a risk of of something happening. And they're all great actors and they all fit the roles perfectly. So I think going into it, I kind of already had a small idea of who I work with that could fit into each of those roles. And as it developed and I started reaching out to each one of them, it kind of all came together. So I think for the most part, I think everyone in the main crew I'd worked with before, everything, like the main cast I'd worked with before. And I think pretty much all of them, or I at least had in mind a little bit when I wrote the project. So, yeah. So to answer your question, yeah, I think it's a trust thing. It's a team thing. It's like, being on set's difficult for the most part. And especially if you don't have certain luxuries, and then especially if you're asking someone like, okay, we got to get dragged by a boat, and, we're doing all this sort of stuff, and just knowing someone that you've worked with before and that you trust each other and you'll make the best that you can possibly make.
Yeah, no one's storming off because they expected something else, or beyond the characters and the actors, a little bit. I mean, it's no secret, like when you look at your filmography, like you're a big fan of science fiction, of time bending, of a lot of these concepts and themes show up throughout your work. Talk to me about, like, the biggest inspirations for this movie in particular. Like, what were you drawing on? Anything specifically? Was there any, like, influences you really wanted to pick up? I know you mentioned somewhere like there was some John Carpenter influence on it. What were some of the other key kind of things working through your mind or concepts as you were writing?
I think it started almost like two different things where, on the previous project, we started talking about those. It's kind of like a cliche. We're like, bunch of badass mercenaries go to an island, and you kind of know what's going to happen. And so, but we just love the idea of making that, because it's just like, we had never done a real action movie before, and we fell in love with that brand of movie, that style, and so we're like, we knew we wanted to do that. And you can name a bunch of movies that kind of already do that. And then my idea was, we know, we can do some time bendy stuff that already was kind of playing with a different idea. And so the goal ended up being, let's make a movie where the first, act sets up a movie, gets the audience comfortable with that kind of almost cliche type of movie where, okay, we'll meet the mercenaries. They're going to go to this island. Shit's going to go down. They're all, out testosteroning each other, the whole thing. And then, the music of the helicopters, all of it. Let's make a movie so the audience feels super comfortable with what they're watching. They know. And then let's start introducing some other concepts and some, time mind bendy sort of things. And then we have a different sandbox to play in, because the audience feels so comfortable with what we've already set up that we can do some crazy stuff and not worry about it being too confusing. And that was definitely a thing. We were like, let's just make sure we don't get way too confusing, because we've done that before, gone down that rabbit hole with time travel, because it's really easy to do. And we're like, for this, let's make sure that every bit of information we introduced about this island and everything is relevant to the characters' decisions, and we don't say any more or any less than we need to, just to keep it flowing. And so yeah, that was the idea. And I think in terms of the horror side, I mean, that's just always like I was telling someone, I think Evil Dead is just like embedded in my like DNA, especially Evil Dead 2. And so like I'll write something and we'll start making something and we'll start realizing like that connective tissue with Evil Dead unintentionally, and we're like, oh yeah, you're right. That was straight. But it's just I think it's something that it's just such a part of us that it's just always going to somehow make its way in one form or another into what we're making. So yeah, it's a kind of all mishmash of those different ideas.
Yeah. It's interesting because I didn't pick up Evil Dead, but it's interesting with the designs or the creatures. There's definitely some of that vibe. But I mean, how do you not at a certain point? Like, there's some things that you're gonna, like you said, it's just part of your vocabulary at a certain point. As much as
the genre completely, like you said. So it's like it's not just us. It changed everything at that point, and everything started looking a lot more like that because it just looks awesome, And
yeah, right. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I'm curious too. Like, I think, like, initially watching the trailer and then watching the movie, like, I also like, I'm a huge fan of, or I don't game at all now, but I used to be a huge gamer and I was like a big Resident Evil guy. And that's like the vibes that I picked up early in the trailer. The movie goes in very different directions. Obviously, I think on the sci-fi angles, was that something that was in there at all, or like was that an influence at all?
I was never a gamer, but I definitely had seen the Resident Evil movies, or at least a couple of them. Yeah. So I was aware of that, and I was aware of that's another one of those movies that kind of just lands right in that library of mercenaries getting killed off by monsters. So totally aware of that. I like the first movie, but no, the game. I think I had friends that told me the similarities, but I never really was super into video games.
Gotcha. What about the science fiction influence? Do you have? I'm curious, just in general. I know you mentioned. I was watching one of your interviews for, I believe it was First Contact, and you're talking about. They were asking if you believed in aliens, and you were kind of pontificating about that possibility. What are some of the biggest science fiction influences on you and on your work? You mentioned, I think, Star Trek in that conversation.
TNG was always huge. I was like my dad and I's thing. We'd watch Star Trek Next Generation. But like I said before, like the growing up there, we were just kind of recreating scenes from other movies that are like, but we'd named the characters different stuff and everything. But it was always some version of an Indiana Jones scene, some version of of something in that kind of Terminators, like that Spielberg, Cameron, that kind of thing. All those movies, that was kind of like definitely what we were going after. And then I think our taste, I don't know if sophisticated is the wrong word, but they changed as we got older. Right. But yeah, that was definitely. And then the one movie that like was just on all the time for us, and the first the VHS and then the DVD and everything was Back to the Future. Right. And just, I mean, I'm not the only one, but like, yeah, I just loved that movie. And then definitely the second one I just loved. And that idea of, I remember just blowing my mind that the second one, that they are literally just like walking through the first movie within the second movie. My brain was like, oh, you can do that, and you can play with scenes that have already happened and kind of revisit things. And I think that just that alone, and that's maybe just the third act of the second Back to the Future, I that got my brain going a lot as a kid. And then later, that time travel like gets more and more interesting the less the time travel is, or less the smaller the time span. So it's like 1 day or 2 years and stuff. So you can actually literally like revisit specific events. That it starts getting more complicated, but for me, it starts getting more interesting. And like we went back to the
Army of Darkness style,
which is awesome, obviously. But the time travel side, like the paradox, that whole element, you don't have to worry about as much. And so, but versus, you go back in time 1 week or whatever, and you're literally trying to avoid yourself or that kind of sort of thing. That always fascinated me, and just also cinematically fascinated me, because it's just something that that's what movies are, is just the manipulation of time and events and everything. So you're just putting one layer over that with just slightly manipulating time events within the screenplay and then doing it within the edit. And so that was something that just, I've revisited the concept over in different ways, over and over again. But I think it was really just that idea of just like, you can really only do that within a movie. It's hard to, you can maybe write it, but like the showing repeated events or events in different contexts or with slightly different editing. And so, I think that's where that kind of started.
Yeah. No, definitely. I like that. And I issue a spoiler warning in the intro of this episode, but I'm just going to do a blanket one now because we can talk freely. But that's one of the things I really liked within the movie is that moment where he's like, oh, that was yesterday, like he's kind of breaking down this like previous trip to this island. And it's like, oh yeah, that was yesterday. And it's kind of this like, what, what kind of moment? And I think that kind of stuff's interesting. Cause I have you seen the new Indiana Jones?
I haven't. No, I've heard there's just I heard there's elements of time travel. I haven't seen it yet.
Okay. But
you can spoil it though if you need to.
Okay. Well, I don't want to spoil it for you because I know you're a fan of the franchise. But it's one of the things though where it raises the question of time travel and discussion like that. But I kind of agree. Like my tolerance for, hey, we're gonna go back way back is very low. Like I think it's okay, but like the Army of Darkness style, hey, we're going back to the Middle Ages, it never quite like thrills me the way I think it does some people. But I'm really fascinated, like movies like Tenet or that deal with it, or Edge of Tomorrow. Like there's a lot that deal with like that same week or day or like couple of hours. Like I think that's really fascinating, and I think it's interesting. Like even Zack Snyder's Army of the Dead kind of plays with that concept like just a little bit, and then doesn't really do anything with it after it brings up the idea.
Maybe
for
there'll
a second.
be sequels or something. I don't know. Maybe I'm setting something up.
Right. So but I think that's a really interesting perspective when you're approaching that writing, because like sometimes watching, the hardest part is like following all these threads. When you're writing, is this just like a bunch of 3x5 cards going like this point to this point? Is it just something you're keeping in your head all the time? Like how do you make sure that you're not saying something happened at this point that would invalidate something at another point? Like how do you keep that straight?
That's funny. So year or two ago, it got released in January, but we made a movie called The Tomorrow Job, which is like a time travel heist movie that basically the premise is you take a pill and you trade places with your tomorrow self for 1 hour. So your mind goes tomorrow and your tomorrow mind comes back to today. And that would instantly became so complicated that like the movie, I love the movie and it's a very fun heist movie and it kind of keeps the tone a little light, and kind of like that Ocean's 11 vibe. But the time travel aspects definitely snowballed a little bit just because you're having to keep track of what happened today. What we did this eye color thing to kind of show where they are, but still it was we realized for this movie, we're like, all right, we got to figure out a way to simplify it. And we, like you said, like that brain break moment of that was yesterday, which happens, I think, closer to the end of Act 2 in the movie.
Right.
You can only do that a couple times, I think we realized, before the audience feels exhausted and just needs to kind of like revisit, rethink. And I think the other movies have done, like, I think Tenet, suffered a little bit of that. I love Tenet. I think it's really awesome, looks awesome, everything like that. But it took me a bit to like kind of like, wait, hold on, just because there's so many of those mind melting moments that you're trying to catch up with the movie as the movie's happening. So, but yeah, so I think that was one big lesson I was learned is like, we can only do a couple big brain breaks, let's call them. Right. The one that you mentioned specifically was the one that needed to like really explain everything kind of and set up that last act. So yeah, that was a big one. And then, like I said before, I think, and this isn't just time travel. This is a lot of horror movies, a lot of sci-fi stuff. Is only give the information that's really relevant to the
Hmm.
characters and what they need to do. As soon we had mapped out, I think there was a draft of the screenplay that started to go into, the bigger players that, and then what they're doing, how the island actually functions in more of a, science jargon sort of way, and
Right.
kind of got a little too in the weeds with the details. And I think, like most horror movies, I think stay stronger the less information you get,
Right.
and as you start explaining everything, it only opens up more questions.
Right.
So yeah, that was the idea. Is we'll only a couple of big moments that the audience has to catch up to and figure out. And then in terms of like actual time travel, we're doing spoilers. It really only happens technically twice, but
Yeah.
one big one and hopefully by then we've fed you enough information that the audience can figure out exactly what just happened there. And so that was just like that was the idea. Is we'll still keep that mind bending nature, but just simplified, I guess.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I think that's a smart approach, because I think that's where it is. It's a tightrope, and like it's the fact that even like Christopher Nolan,
yeah,
it's like difficult to walk that tightrope. Like for anyone to try to do, and when you over explain, and I think Tenet makes the audacious attempt to try to explain very specifically everything. um, but like you can rest a lot in the ambiguity, I think, in these kind of projects, and I think, one of the things I think you did well in this is, like you're focused more on, say like Grant Schumacher's character, he's playing knowing this information that no one else knows.
yeah,
And you're focused more on how he's handling that and how everyone else reacts to that versus here's the way that this rift open, like you're not going too deep into that kind of science fiction lore, which I think could have been a lot more talky than it needed to be, and also could have just
yeah.
gotten, you know, too infatuated with itself, which I think happens a lot with these kind of things.
I agree, and I think like just back to the Nolan thing. Like I think Tenet, I think that was a movie that got better because I think my first watch, you're constantly trying to
You're just like,
understand
this looks cool.
and experience it at the
Yeah.
same time. But like you go back to a similar kind of complicated movie like Inception, and I think what always worked about that movie for me was there was such a strong emotional core to the movie
Mm.
that like, and like you were saying with the character stuff, that even if you didn't fully understand what was happening on like I don't know, like a full plot level or the actual mechanics of the dream and everything, you knew what the motives of the characters were, and you always were able to follow why the Leonardo DiCaprio was making the decisions he was making and why everyone else was making the decisions that they were making, even if you didn't fully get it on the first watch. And so
Right.
that's why that movie works really, really well. And I think that was something that any movie needs to focus on is just like how the characters affected, and it is this becoming more about the plot or the time travel, all that kind
Yeah.
of stuff, or is it still focused on the mission at hand or whatever the character's goals are or whatever like that? Because I think
Right.
as long as the audience doesn't get lost in that, they're usually pretty good about everything else.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, as far as, the audience is one thing, and then working with the cast specifically, obviously you'd worked with them before. I think they kind of know how your brain's working, approaching these, like keeping them straight on it, or like giving them the information they needed to, because obviously they have to bring the characters' experiences into the performance. Like, were you having different conversations with each as far as like, here's what you do know, here's what you don't, play it as if you know something the other characters don't, like, or did you kind of just give them the script and say, interpret this as you will?
They all had the script. I didn't. I'm no good at doing the.
You get
that,
this segment and these pages, and you
I
get
got enough to worry about. I'm
right.
not. I need everyone to be like to absolutely know what I'm trying to go for on a bigger picture, and then we'll figure out how to get each moment down.
Yeah.
But yeah, they all. We had different approaches for each character. I think Grant probably had, plays Russ, the most difficult challenge ahead of him, just because he has to know something and then he had to justify doing certain things, and it all rooted back to like that when he says, if you could relive the worst moment of your life and make it just that little bit better, would you do it? And so I kept on telling him, like, this, whatever decision you're making, just you're going back to that, and once he got into it, I really liked it because he realized his character had to be a bit crazy to do any of this thing, and then so from the get-go, from that opening scene where I think he's working on his car and he talks to Addison, he's got a look in his eye that he's a little crazy, and that was something I thought was an awesome decision that he kind of just stuck with for the rest of the movie, until he confesses and everything, and then you kind of see a softening happen there. So no, that was a lot of him just kind of digging in, being like, all right, how do I figure this out? And then James is kind of the opposite, where I'd be like, you don't know anything. He played Case, and yeah, so it was like that kind of amnesia, and which was necessary to make a bunch of other things work. But that and he plays that perfectly, because I think there's a version of that that's very boring and doesn't, and then there's kind of a flat character, and I think he's able to put enough charm and everything in it to make it work. And then everyone, and we kind of went through the backstories of each character. LeJohn, who plays Tag, about his daughter, and how he's slightly outside the sphere of these mercenaries, and same thing with Chris, who plays Dex, how he's the more cerebral one, and kind of just figure out how they differ from the other characters. And then Michael, who plays Colt in the movie, that he's that crazy cowboy guy, and and just making sure that everyone kind of knew, like I said before, tropes. We definitely didn't shy away from certain tropes because we want to break things later on, and it was just way easier, I think, for an audience to digest a movie that they're familiar with all of these characters from other movies. It's building off of your existing knowledge of this genre. So
right, yeah. Going into kind of the finale piece, because this is the part that really stood out to me just visually, is I love kind of I don't even know how to describe it, the force field, but this kind of rift visualized, the aurora borealis kind of effects throughout. How difficult was it pulling that off? Because it looks really good, and on the VFX side, just pulling off something again big like that. How did you go about doing that? And then that final, you referenced earlier, that final getting dragged by the boat. I know James is like ripped. That's like the real finale of the movie to me, is like he's fine. When he reveals in the tank top, you're like, why didn't they have him like this the whole movie? This is like the most action hero looking dude ever. How did you go about pulling those things off, and how tricky was that logistically on a smaller budget?
It was funny. So we knew we were shooting this about early last September. The script had been written, but we weren't sure if we were making it and in what capacity we're making it, how much money we were going to have to deal with and all that. So we kind of got the idea we were making it. We kind of had a good idea of what the budget was going to be, but certain things hadn't been figured out. But what we realized was, probably realistically, with pre-production and everything, we'd be shooting end of October or November, which was way too late to shoot this boat sequence. So we were shooting in upstate New York mainly.
Nice and warm and sunny at that time of year.
Yeah, and I couldn't do that to James. He was already doing them. So I'm like, all right, we got to start shooting. We got to get this sequence. That was literally the first thing we shot, was the boat sequence. And there was a lot of moving pieces going. We had the boat that's in the movie, but we had a second boat so we could be going alongside of it. We had the drone in the air. And it was it was still cold. It was like late September. So, and everyone else had a wetsuit except for James because of his wardrobe. So yeah, he knew we discussed it. We're like, we could put you in a long sleeve shirt, but why? That would have been a disservice for everyone. So we got that together, and it was nuts, but it was honestly like such a relief getting that in the can when we did. Just because at that point, like we maybe just got the hardest thing we're going to shoot done. And then so yeah, that was basically the process. I mean, we rehearsing on land, just every single piece of it, and then once you're actually shooting, there's some parts that we just have to do, practically there's, and then some other parts where I was able to be on the boat with them, and maybe there's other shots literally we're on land with just a big fan going in their face, just to there's a lot of different pieces in there. But yeah, and then it's funny, in post, the VFX went through a lot of different trials. At first it was like this cloudy, stormy sort of thing where there was lightning and all that, and we're just like, it's not interesting, it's cool, but it's what. And then we kept on like kind of trying different things, and then finally I was toying with something, and then we finally the helicopter crash in the beginning of the movie, we were like, that has to crash into a force field. And once we figured out how that looked, that informed all the decisions for that finale. Being said, like anything, like I'm very happy with the final product, but that's always going to be the longest part of the whole post-production process. There's still shots in there I'm like, oh, if we just had more time a little bit on that shot or this shot or whatever. Which I think that's just always going to be the case with VFX. Is I think that
would happen if you had another year and another $100 million. You'd be.
I know.
I would still change this.
I know. But that was that, and then we those VFX shots, I think were probably, there was a couple shots in there, and that was, I want to say that was the last thing before picture locking, was those pictures. It drags always. So
sure. Well, I want to ask you, I'm going to ask you two questions. I'm going to go into kind of a rapid round. I like to ask everybody the same questions that comes on. But I'm curious, and I've never asked somebody this before. What's the thing that you're most proud of with this movie that you're like, I can't believe we pulled that off? And then number two, what is the thing where if you had unlimited budget and unlimited time, you wish you could have done within the movie?
Good question. I don't know if I'm most proud of this, but it's just a thing that I love in the movie that was just, it's more sheer luck than anything. We knew we needed those helicopter shots of them in the helicopter. It just wasn't going to be exciting enough if they were taking a boat or any other way. We just
cut to we're here.
It's boring. And then, so we got hooked up at this helicopter school in upstate New York, and the guy was really awesome. And we worked out a deal, and those it's funny, those like shots in the helicopter of them in the sky and all that. It amounts for maybe 20 seconds, if that. It's by far the most expensive shots in the entire movie, but we just need those in there. But then while we were there, while I was scouting it, the guy opens up the hangar at the school, and it's been a bunch of like millionaires, or I don't know, billions, they could be, I don't know, all keep their private jets and helicopters in this hangar. So I'm like, do you think we could shoot in the hangar? And he was just like, I don't see why not. As long as you don't, hurt anything or damage anything. I'm like, really? So that scene of them all meeting in the hangar, I think initially was somewhere completely different. And we very quickly moved the scene there. We, of course, needed to get the Armageddon shot, the hangar opening, and them all walking the hangar right at the sunrise. And then them just standing in this hangar that they're just surrounded by helicopters and private jets and everything, and it just added so much production value and just made the whole thing feel a lot more exciting, when that ultimately costs the production next to no additional money. We just got lucky. This guy was so cool. So I'm really proud of that moment. I don't know if it was like it's just luck, if you will, but and the other one I'll say is and that's another piece of advice. It's like whatever opportunity you get to add a little bit of value, just jump on it and take it. The hardest part of the movie, you would think, was the boat stuff, but that mountaintop fight scene, just because it's about it was like a few mile hike into it. So there's no driving. We had to carry all our gear and everything like that. We finally got there, and we're shooting, and there's also a lot of complication, a lot of moving pieces within the scene because they're fighting versions of themselves.
Right.
So makeup wise, we had to carefully plan exactly how we shoot it, what we're shooting first, what we're shooting second, to make sure that, you know, our actor isn't covered in makeup when we need to be shooting something else. So that was logistically a nightmare and also physically really tough. But you know, getting that done was really exciting. I'm really happy with that scene. And just the way the doubles, we tried to do every trick we could in terms of having an actual person there that acted as a double, but also there's some comp shots in there where, you know, they're a classic thing, and then just the over the shoulders. So try to throw as many tricks just to make it feel like there's not just one specific trick that we keep revisiting for showing the doubles. Yeah, that was exhausting. And we also, you know, since we're shooting at sunset, we have to hike back out in the night. So there was a lot of parts of that day that I think everyone was super, super proud after we finished that. And especially once we were watching from dailies and saw how things
it's working.
Came out. It's working. It looks cool. And it was worth it. So, that was probably the hardest and most proud I was as us as a unit, just all being able to tough through that and get that in the can. If I had more money, I mean, like, I think VFX is always something that, you know, you can keep going with. I think also it's stunt wise. I think if with more money, I will probably end up going as big as I possibly can with whatever the stunt is. Maybe we could have added some boat stuff, or it's just one, you know, anytime you introduce boats or vehicles or whatever, and those sorts of sequences, more money equals you can just wreck more things.
Right.
And so that would have been awesome to just have more wreckage in the movie, maybe just for what it was. But yeah, and I think that between that and the VFX, I think more money would have been one day we'll see.
Right. All right. Well, I'm going to ask you some questions. Ask everybody that comes on the show. So I'm gonna go through these, and hopefully we can get these done here in 10 minutes. It's always a challenge, but we'll do our best. First and foremost, if you had to program a double feature of any movie alongside this movie, what would you pick and why?
Oh boy. Oh, a double feature. There's a movie I really like, which not many people talk about, Triangle. I don't know if you've seen it. And it's another time loop movie, but they basically go to this abandoned cruise ship, and it's another one themselves are there, but told very differently. And there's no monsters or zombies in it, but they realize that they end up consistently killing each other on this thing. So it's very gory, very scary, but super fun. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Who do you think is the most underrated artist working today? This could be filmmaker, actor, stunt performer, VFX artist, you name it, composer.
A really good question. Underrated, because I'm what did I just? That's a tough one. That's because I'm trying to think, like, what defines underrated, you know? Because if they've reached that certain level of success, are they actually underrated or not?
Right.
I don't know. I'm just gonna say like a character actor that I always like watching, and just because I just saw him last week in Mission Impossible, and Shea Wiggum showed up, and I'm like, I don't know if you've seen the movie, but
I haven't yet.
He was in. I just saw him before the Kong Skull, and just like anytime he shows up in a movie, I'm just like, he always plays the hard nosed cop or whatever that
sure
FBI agent, and he's always super entertaining. So I'm going to go with something like that. So a character actor that he's always that guy in a movie, but he never disappoints.
Yeah, we just finished watching Righteous Gemstones, and he's in that. He's really funny in that.
He's great in everything. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think is the best decade of film history?
Best decade of film history. I have to say, like, just from a personal level, like the movies of like the 80s, or like even like I'll say 80s, just because I think it changed how movies were kind of made, and it definitely influenced how I perceived movies and then just in it just as like, yeah, I would say 80s. 80s just, between all of the Spielberg stuff and everything, and it's just there was so much coming out and now we're just seeing all of that kind of stuff revisited, which I don't mind. That stuff is really good, but I think it's just you can see its fingerprints on everything that was made after.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. What is a movie that people would be surprised to know that you enjoy?
I don't know how surprising any of these movies would be. Like, I've probably watched MacGruber more than like any other. It's like, and I don't know how surprising that is because I think remember when it came out, it was one of our favorite movies and no one really knew. I think in the 10 years since it's come out, it's gotten more of the due that it deserves, and it's not just like a bad movie. But I've probably seen that movie over 100 times. It's just fantastic at every level.
If you were given the green light to remake any film, what would you choose and why?
Remake any film? You would think this would be something I'd thought of before, but because you want it to be like a missed opportunity. You don't want to remake something that's already
The Godfather or something.
No, like Back to the Future should never be touched, but it's one of those. It needs to be something that just didn't quite hit it, but was a perfect. Such a good question. God, these are tough. Because they feel so defining.
I know. So this is usually where everything comes to a halt, and people are like, "Why'd you ask me that?" I don't know.
It's always those questions. It's like it feels like, it's a really good question, but I'm like,
and like tomorrow you'd be like, "Oh, I would remake that."
Yeah, in a different scenario, I'd be like, I need weeks to figure this out. But I'll just say, like, I haven't seen it. I watched it so much as a kid. I don't even know if it would work today. I don't know how it would work, but like Time Bandits was a movie that just
that's the Terry Gilliam.
Terry Gilliam movie.
I haven't seen that. Yeah.
And it's like a kid at night, and he's just bunch of time traveling guys just come marching through his closet and take him on an adventure throughout the rest of the movie, and it's really exciting. And I think I don't know. Again, I'm going to change that, and like as soon as we get off, I'll be like, that was terrible. I could, but I'll stick to that for right now.
Which of your films do you think is the best representation of you as a creator?
That's funny because I've done, like you said, a bunch of time travel movies and then a bunch of horror creature movies. And like, I think they're both like, I love making both. I don't think I've ever really crossed them like I have with Island Escape. And so like Island Escape definitely feels like, and I know this is, of course I'm going to say the movie.
It's the movie I'm currently promoting is definitely
of course I would
favorite.
Say that, but it is like the only one that like I've ever made that just kind of feels like everything I love about the other movies kind of meshed into one that actually works. So yeah, I mean, I would say Island Escape. I don't think there's other movies I love and there's big moments in it, but in terms of just like being able to put all the ingredients that have made up my career up until now into one movie, definitely Island Escape.
Awesome. And last question I ask everybody that comes on the show, if you could give one piece of advice to an aspiring filmmaker who is listening to this interview, what would you say?
I think like what we talked about earlier, there's gold in making that bad stuff, or maybe it's awesome, but whatever you're making, like, and don't put a bunch of money into it or anything, but just, get together with your friends, make something and expect to make mistakes within it, edit it together and see where you went wrong or where you went right. And then, rinse and repeat and then just keep doing it. I think the education you're going to get from that is good. And then eventually you're going to be making stuff that you like more and more because you're going to see what did work. And then eventually, what the last thing, don't go looking for money super early. I've seen that. And I'm not even talking about like I have my feature I want to make or anything like that. Just even a short film, I've seen people spend And if you have the money to spend a lot on that, then good for you. That whatever. But
Yeah.
in terms of like, if you start convincing whether it's family members or investors or whatever to
Mm.
make sure that you've done the work in terms of like I said, making those other movies that
Yeah,
are
the reps. Yeah.
the other movies that like the just the home movies or the little experimentations or whatever. There's nothing wrong
Right.
with just keeping making those even if they're bad, because yeah, you don't want to be in a situation. I think I've watched a lot of people get in that situation where they do somehow end up with a bunch of money, and then
Yeah.
if it doesn't go well, which it might not, it probably won't, because
Your uncle's really upset.
yeah,
'Cause he
and then
gave
you've let a lot of
gave you
people
money.
down. A lot of people,
Right.
you've let a lot of people down that don't have money, and so I say, yeah, there's absolutely nothing wrong with just grabbing a camera or whatever you have to work with and just making it yourself. And not everything needs to be, we're making this for a festival, or this is a pilot for a web
Right.
series,
It'd
or
just be for you.
yeah, no, maybe it turns into something, and maybe you're like, oh, this is good enough, we can put this festival, but not everything needs to be
Hmm.
specifically for something. It can just
Right.
you guys can just spend a day. Like there was, just even recently, the I don't know if you heard about Wonder Studio, it's like that AI VFX sort of thing.
Oh yeah.
And we're like, oh, that's really cool. Like, let's see how it works. And like, so we quickly just like wrote some stuff around just experimenting with that, and just me and some of the crew just spent a day messing around and made something. I mean, it's unwatchable, but it was a cool experimentation for
Right.
the tool and seeing how that goes. So yeah, I think that kind of stuff, just keep doing that, and I think that's my biggest advice. Just keep
Just do it.
getting better. Like,
Yeah.
and you can't get better by just talking about it, or maybe you can, but really keep getting better. It's like a sport or whatever it is. I think the more you keep repeating and doing things, making more, putting stuff in the edit, filming it, putting back in the edit, the more you just keep doing that, the better you're going to get. So I think that's my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah, I think that's huge, and I think it's a good reminder, because like I love the putting in the reps advice, but it's also with how quickly things are changing, it's easy to feel lost, or feel like you're waiting, and I still find that, I felt like that straight out of high school, and I feel like that still now is like sometimes you get that kind of analysis paralysis where you sit there and go, okay, once I figure out how to use this new tool, then I'll make something. And it's like the best way to learn is doing it. Because it's easy to look at what somebody does and go like, I'm not ready, or I'm not there yet, or I'm not in the position to try to use this new camera or this new technology or this new editing software. But it's just going out and doing it, and strengthening your relationships with your friends while you're doing it is such an invaluable tool.
It's weird though, because I've heard exact opposite pieces of advice thrown at me. Like, you don't want to do that. You need to specialize. Yeah. Or you need to specialize. You don't want to, or don't specialize. You want to keep as broad as possible, especially if you want to direct. You don't want to get caught in whatever. And I think that's, for me anyway, a bit old school mentality right now, just because the tools are so accessible right now. You can do whatever you need to do. So like, just become the best version of a director that you can be, and then when that opportunity does come, and it probably at some point, if you keep hustling and everything, it's going to come, that it feels like an opportunity that you're going to take, and not something that might not end up going how you think.
There's just not that one. I could talk about this forever, but it's just not that. You mentioned opportunity, like that is kind of the key. Is like everything's changing so quickly, where I think the idea of like, you could start film school today, and in 4 years, like, the basics are there, but like the tech is all different. Everything is all different. So it's like, I think there has to be some intuition there of like, okay, this door's opening, let me go through it, or not, or this door's opening, or there's these 30 doors, and just kind of following what happens. Cause like the idea of everybody has is like, I'm going to be Spielberg and sneak on the lot at Universal, and they're going to offer me a bungalow, and I'm going to make, I'm going to sign a 6-picture deal. It's like,
I know.
Yeah. That's kind of mythology at this point. It's like, you're going to have this thing open to this thing, open to this thing. And it may require different skill or stretching into a different area, but you have to follow those threads wherever they go. But that all comes with the reps.
Mark Duplass has that really good speech on. Have you seen it? The cavalry isn't coming.
Yeah,
I'd watched that so many times, and it's true. It's just like, and then maybe there's one, that
1 in a million or one in every 10,000.
All of a sudden, all your prayers are answered, and you're getting all the tools you need. But for the most part, it's a hustle, and you got to figure out why you're doing it first, and then once you figure out why you're doing it, approach it from that angle. And then like I said, it's like I see, especially in the city and stuff, you see people that, like you said, a rich uncle or something like that, or worse, get investors or put all their money, max out their credit cards, whatever they're doing. When you do that, just make sure that your tool set's as sharp as it can possibly be, and then you can go in and really execute the thing you want to make. And that was like that movie I mentioned, that Bigfoot movie, Monstrous, was like, again, we made it for next to nothing, but a friend of mine had written the script. We both had a gap in the schedule. I was working at a production, but we had a week off for Christmas, and so we got the people together that we knew we needed, and then just went out and shot it. And I treated it like, even if I didn't really have a gaff or anything, I treated it as if like every shot needed to look like it was from a movie per se. Yeah. And so we just kept on doing that throughout the shoot. And, it's flawed, and it's from a technical level, it's decent for what it was. But, there's a bunch of stuff going on there. But that, led to me getting a little bit of money to do another one. And then it kind of hopefully is still growing from there. But that was just, I didn't beg anyone else for money or anything like that. And then we're living in a time that, like, depending on your skill set, you can just kind of go out and make something, and there's a chance that it might, even if it doesn't make any money or doesn't do anything, that could lead to just doing something else, not getting a big budget to like, here's $1 million, go make your dream movie. But someone might be like, all right, this is pretty good. I think I can trust you with 50 grand here.
Right.
See what you can do. And then you do that. And if it makes its money back, then great. And then
here's more.
Here's more. And then if that makes its money back, and then that's
it's almost like it's almost like working actor, but working director, working pretty, like that is probably the majority of the industry that people don't really talk about. Is like, it's project to project. Here, we're going to give you a little bit of a resource here, and I think that's a really interesting place to be in. And there's a lot of freedom within that, and
you look at the economics behind it, it's just like, it's interesting because you only spend as much of on a movie as you think it can possibly make back. So if you do any more than that, you get in a situation where your project needs to get into Sundance, or else a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money, and you don't want to be in that situation. Or maybe you do, I don't know.
In the extreme where it's like an Indiana Jones movie can make almost $300 million and be a flop, and it's like, why did it cost this much? But anyway, I know we could riff on all this stuff for a long time. I appreciate you. I appreciate you doing this. Don't want to take too much more of your time, but thank you so much for chatting. Excited for you to get to see your project and see what you work on next. But thanks again for coming on and sharing some wisdom with us.
No, thank you. This is fun. No, thanks a lot. We're actually on set right now. I got to run to set as soon as we're done with this, but same distributor. So we'll see. Awesome. Hopefully we can chat again in a few months about that.
Yeah, sounds good. Look forward to it.